Do it.
Oh, goodness. Okay, I'm going to pretend like you guys didn't just see who our speaker is today. Uh, Thank you so much. Welcome back to the Radically Loved Summit. I'm joined by a very, very special speaker today. She is somebody that, is a vital role player to the world of Radically Loved. And she's an author. She is an incredibly creative, just beautifully imaginative, deep teacher. She's a podcast host, and she also helps me with our very, very, very exciting segment, Wisdom Wednesdays. So, without further ado, here is Tessa Tovar. Welcome.
Thank you. That was a beautiful introduction. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you here. And in fact, here we are, day 9.
Mhm.
We're talking about you are radically engaged. We're talking about the sort of relationship between connection and engagement. And I talked about this early on in the summit, but sometimes people have no idea how much goes into things like this. And I just want to take this brief moment to say that if it wasn't for you, we wouldn't have gotten this organized and have had the bandwidth to do it all. So thank you so much for making this happen.
Oh, it's so important. And it's I love this format. I love that we get to go through each chapter of You Are Radically Loved. It's just such a fun and creative, speaking of creative, a wonderful way to guide us through your book and get us excited about reading it from end to end, which I've read from end to end, by the way.
Yeah, she had really no choice. She had no choice but to read this book. Not even, I can't even say once. She's had to read the different renditions of this, so she's seen the progression from first manuscript to the finished product that you're all going to get to see, hopefully. So thanks. What has been your experience? I'm just curious.
Oh, it's gosh, it's hard to put it into words, but okay, first of all, it's awe-inspiring. Like literally as I was reviewing my specific chapter and topic last night, I got emotional for multiple reasons because of the topic and what you wrote itself, but also to watch you go through this journey and just knowing everything that's gone on behind the scenes to get you to this point in time to bring this baby out into the world. And now it's like, okay, baby, spread your wings, fly away.
Yeah, go fly.
Yeah, it's emotional.
Yeah, it's a lot. Yeah, it's just it's been a very interesting and arduous journey. I've talked about this in the man. It's like I've done so many of these. I don't even know. I'm like, was it a podcast or was it just a conversation that we
Yeah.
had? But I think I was talking actually when I interviewed Jen Sincero last December when her paperback for You Are a Badass came out. We were talking about the writing and the creative process and how it was not an easy process. And I oftentimes feel a little bit of jealousy when people say, oh, this was writing a book was no big deal. It was just so easy for me. It just came in and I was just able to do it. I am just, that's not my experience at all. That's not
Yeah.
my experience. And especially this chapter, as I get towards the latter chapters, um, it became more difficult for me for some reason, maybe just because of I wanted to give the reader the experience of my own personal transformation, and not only just my own personal transformation, but the experience that this is a cycle and we go through it over and over and there is no end to it. There's just a process of learning how to navigate. And so much of the journey of writing the book, that's why it's the subtitle is A Healing Journey to Self-Love, because ultimately we only have ourselves to guide us through this journey. That highest part of ourselves, consciousness, higher power, God, or for me it's anchored in that resonating feeling, that knowing.
Mhm.
And I guess as the further along the journey gets, especially in this part of, as we're coming to this part of spirit, it starts to feel really um, intense, right? I mean, I'm talking about the reality of the transformations that happen in relationships and so on. So before we get too deep into that, I'd love to hear, yeah, like what this brought up for you, and what was your experience, and what is your experience with what engagement means? Like when you think about the word engaged, it can mean many things, and obviously
Mhm.
pertaining to what it means in the book. One of the quotes in the book says, engaging with someone is an intentional practice. So when we talk about this chapter, you are radically engaged, it's pertaining to that experience. But I'd love to hear from you, like what this brought up and anything you'd like to share.
Yeah. So three themes really jumped off the page at me as I went through the chapter. The first theme, because I'm a communications major and I'm so interested in reading body language. And so I think of communication as nonverbal communication, maybe more than half. I'm sure there's a statistic about there about how much our communication comes through nonverbal communication. So a lot of what's happening in our engaged relationships with ourselves, with other, is sometimes under the line of awareness. So you talk about engagement being a conscious choice, or connecting, right? So there's kind of like that nuance. And so I always kind of sit back and I think about, well, what am I doing with my hands? And as I'm talking to another person, let's say, are my legs crossed? Am I mirroring this other person? Or if it's a more contentious conversation, maybe it's feeling like really highly charged with um, anger or fear or something along those lines, I might be crossing my arms, or that person might be crossing their arms and their shoulders might be all tense. And we notice breathing kind of stops almost altogether, right? So there's so much that I read into when I'm thinking about not just being in relationship with one another, because I think that is a continuous thing. Like think about my long-term relationship with my husband, but in particular conversation, and how engaged am I in that moment with this person? Am I listening to what they're saying verbally and non-verbally? And am I mirroring that back to them for better or worse, right? Like, am I mirroring that kind of nonverbal communication back to them? And so I think about that came up for me in a big way. It's what I studied in college, so it's always really interesting for me to see it play out in
Yeah.
real life, you know. And then a second theme was, well, we started with it in the chapter, and that is relationship. And you're telling the story about how you and Tori went through kind of a rough patch, and every relationship, long term especially, goes through these rough patches. And I say that plural because
Yeah.
oftentimes there are many.
Especially
So
if you've been with somebody for over a decade.
yes.
You're the promise is that you'll go through several. Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you choose to engage with that, right? And that's evolved so much over time. And I can speak to this from that over a decade standpoint, going on 2 decades now. I have changed so much from the girl who I was when I started this relationship with my partner and who I am now. And that, I think it's hard for me to separate these two from the third theme in the chapter, which is a teacher, a mentor, or a guide. Because I really, at this point in my life, I view all of my relationships, even the ones that are acquaintances or fleeting, or it's like the person that I come into contact with at the grocery store that I don't really know, right? I view all of these people, these points of contact, as teachers. So the themes of nonverbal communication, relationships, and teachers. And I want to point out, or I want to talk a little bit about my relationship with Jorge and why he's been one of my biggest teachers in life. And I think that's absolutely how we choose our partners. whether again it's a conscious choice or not. So Jorge's taught me so many things. And the act of being engaged with myself and in a relationship, it's a mirror back to me about what I need to learn. So first and foremost, how am I engaging with myself? How am I talking to myself? How am I treating myself? It's going to show up for me in my relationships. And so I think about, they how they talk about in relationships, like the two or three most argued over topics in relationships are like sex, money, and kids. I think is the third one.
Yes.
So Jorge and
I'm
I,
saying yes. I don't actually know the exact, but I'm just saying yes for
it's something
me.
like that, right?
Yeah, that sounds, yes, that's the truth.
So Jorge and I, it's money, like 100% money. And I understand why. Like, okay, so here's the other thing about relationship that I wanted to bring up is it's not just me and Jorge in the room in relationship engaged in conversation. It's it's our parents and it's our childhood and it's our little self and our big self. And so there's a lot of things happening when you're in relationship with another. And there's a lot of people and energy and beliefs and stories and conversation happening beyond which what is actually being said to one another. So I think that's an important thing to point out, because Jorge and I grew up very differently. And we're from two different cultures. So there's a lot to miscommunicate over. Money being one of these big things for him in his childhood. He went through a very rough time where he had to be really scrappy, figure things out, be the provider and the parent. At about 16, he assumed this parent role. So for him, it's like a life or death decision whether or not he goes and gets that coffee today, even though he can afford it, even though we're fine financially. He's still in that mindset of fight or flight about money. And for me, I come to the table with this belief that the universe will provide, and I've always figured it out, and I will always have enough, even if that kind of fluctuates. That what enough means, right? Like my bases are covered. And so to me, that coffee today I can afford, and it's not a big deal. Rosie, we used to argue about this all the time. I would be in my corporate job, my 9 to 5 job, and I would take a break, walk across the street, get myself a cup of coffee, because in my mind, it was like, I deserve it. I'm
Yeah,
working hard. It's $4 or whatever it was back in 2009. Now it's like $10.
exactly. I don't even know how much. I know it's a lot.
Right. So, and then I'd get home from work and Jorge would be like, Tessa, did you go get coffee today? With all the seriousness in the world. And I thought he was going to ask me if if the cat died, or or tell me something tragic.
Yeah.
So I think it's really interesting when we're talking about relationship and poignant to point out that there's so much complexity and nuance that's coming to the table in our relationships. And those are always really teachable moments. What did I do back then in my early 20s when he pointed this out to me? I showed up with rage. I was
Oh,
pissed off. I was
yeah.
like, I deserve this coffee. Stop nickeling, diming me.
Yeah.
And now we've come a long way. We've evolved. And a part of that for me, how I engaged with myself, how I showed up in my relationship to myself was I said, we need separate bank accounts. I need to be able to have the autonomy and freedom to go get myself a cup of coffee without checking the boxes and making sure I'm spending money on the places that you think are valuable versus what I think is valuable. And so Jorge really taught me how to fight for what I want and draw my boundaries very clearly. And that took over a decade to figure out. We didn't come to this realization until a few years ago. So it is an evolutionary process. It is a journey, and it is very much points to the work that we need to learn for
Yeah.
ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I can absolutely relate to everything that you're saying because I write about it in the book, how we can tend to be so myopic when it comes to these three topics because we want what we want, and most of the time we are arguing what we think is right. And oftentimes when that's out of alignment with our partner, that's when the friction can happen.
Mhm.
Because I think things need to be this way. Like my big thing with Tori was you have lack mentality. You were raised with lack mentality. This is like not the way that I was raised. Like I definitely come from a place of abundance, and I never have to worry. Even though I we were poor, we didn't have any, like, even saying that to me doesn't even feel right, even though it was the truth. Like it just feels like we just didn't have much, we were just, we were just barely getting by, I didn't If we didn't have means, I didn't know it. I'll put it that way. Like I had no idea, right? I did notice the stark differences between some of my family members and us. We lived in this two-bedroom apartment with like 10 people, and my cousins had houses with pools. And, it was just a very different experience, And for me, having the awareness of the differences really showed me, oh, okay, this is my perspective. This is my opinion, even though mine's better. And we're always going to think that our opinion, that our way is better. We're always going to think, okay, yeah, if only our partner or our loved one or our friend would listen to what I have to say, or if they only saw my perspective, right? So I think that this is really where our human power to connect and engage with people really comes to fruition. Because yes, we are autonomous creatures. We are, I mean, to me, the goal is to be autonomous, to be able to feel empowered within yourself, right? Yeah,
Mhm.
I know that there are relationships that can be codependent, and you and I both suffer from this ailment as well. Um, but I think our sort of cross to bear is learning how to be autonomous. And that's why our biggest teachers are the people that we're in relationship with, because they really show us, oh, okay, I can see how one-sided or single-minded I'm being in this situation. How can I pull back and see the entire landscape, broaden that aperture so that I can observe the whole picture, as opposed to just seeing, well, my way is the best way. Yes, your way is probably the best way. I'll give you that. I'm sure your way is the best way for you. But that's not how we engage. That's not how we connect on a deep level with the other. We connect on a deep level with the other by expanding and by allowing somebody else's perspective in. I'm not saying that you have to acquiesce your belief system, that you have to compromise something that is true to who you are, your values, your morals. I'm saying be open to putting yourself in the shoes of the other. Have that empathetic experience, because only then we can really see what they're going through or their perspective. I mean, I look back during that time where Tori and I were having a really hard time, and I know that you can relate to this because I know, obviously, I've known you for many years. I know your journey and I know your path. And I know that a lot of people out there who have been in long term relationships, I feel like a lot of the times, short term relationships are just relationships that didn't give the time or the space for the long term experience to happen.
Mm.
Like,
Interesting.
do you know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like a lot of the times I mean, there were so many times. I love Tori. I love him so much. He is my person. Like, this is the person that I want to spend the rest of my life with. And even though I still sometimes feel like, ugh, like I'm so mad at him, I'm like, this is it. I'm done.
Mm.
I'm sure a lot of people act on that. And I really do believe that you can manifest and create whatever type of relationship or engagement that you want. If I wanted my relationship to end, sure, it could have ended. I could have found another partner and, you know, collected a whole new set of issues, or I could have decided to stay with the person I was with and actually do the work. For me, it was a spiritual process, a spiritual journey to stick with it and learn and see the ugly parts of myself and the ugly parts in the relationship that I didn't want to see. I didn't want to see where I was flawed. I didn't
Mhm.
want to see where I was coming up short because I was so quick to point out. And there's so many things that didn't make it in the book, right? Like there's so many other examples that didn't make it into the book. Um, because part of me, once I read the final chapter, I'm like, oh, this makes Tori sound like he's so amazing. He is. He's super amazing. He's super great. But the man has his faults and I have mine. And I think that in any human relationship, we can absolutely see that. But how are you willing? It's what I say, right? Are you willing to go through this transformational process? Are you willing to use this as a spiritual practice? Are you willing to do the work that you need to do in order to see things through to the end? Do you want this to work? What is your vision? Do you not know? Are you confused? If you are, then you need to do some self inquiry. You really need to ask yourself the questions. And these are those moments where the people that you really love and respect come in because you need the advice of wise people, especially when it comes to engagement and relationships, because you need to see the examples. You need to see what's possible in
Mhm.
both ways. You need to see what's possible if you're able to leave this relationship. You need to see what's possible if you stick it out. Don't you think?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. 100%. And I want to go back to something you were saying about the ability to put yourself in the other person's shoes. And I think that is 100% key, absolutely important. And I also think it's worth noting that we can get stuck in that place. And I'm guilty of that. Right.
Same.
And so for me, my lesson and my journey out of that was so I got stuck in the place of understanding Jorge's point of view. And I let that guide my decisions for the better part of our marriage. And it wasn't really serving me because I wasn't getting my needs met. So be sure that you're able to find and finding the balance means letting the pendulum swing to both sides so that you feel the extremes, you know what it feels like to go through it, and then you start to practice resting in that middle space. So it's not like expanding isn't, it doesn't mean it's comfortable. That's hard work, right? So there's a story, I think I've told you this before, Rosie, about, well, this is the journey of the lobster. So the lobster's shell is a specific size for a certain number of years. I want to say like 10 years. And so the flesh inside of the lobster body grows inside of that shell until the shell becomes too small and it grows and grows and grows the body inside until the shell breaks off of it. Doesn't that sound really painful?
Oh my
I mean, this
goodness,
is what it
yes.
takes to expand. Like you have to go through that fire, that hero's journey to come out on the other side and be able to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And yes, it's so important to have that person that's walked that path before, to that knows the way, that can shine a light on that dark tunnel. And also those people that show up in your lives that are kind of a negative force can also be teachers too. People that are, maybe they said something that hurt your feelings, or I wonder what you think about this, Rosie. I was thinking about this the other day. When we have someone, this idea of constructive criticism, how do we engage and connect with that? So when is it helpful feedback and when is it harmful feedback, and how do we tell the difference between the two? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, that's super. I mean, yeah, it's such a great question. Constructive feedback uh inspires you and it creates a an opening, albeit sometimes it might be a little bit sharp to grow, but you have a desire to improve.
Mhm.
Negative feedback uh, feels constricted, and it makes you feel like you're repellent, like you sort of go into your shell, right? Like a little, I think of a cancer, right? I'm a cancer, so it's like I can just see myself going into the shell and creating this hard layer where anything that somebody says at that point, it's like a brick wall. You don't listen to
Mm,
them because you're deflecting their negativity. So that's the difference. One of them feels expansive, albeit, just to use your example, it feels like you're breaking open from the shell, and the opposite feels like you're retracting. So that, for me, that's how I can tell the difference between how I feel, right? So I do have friends that are not the best feedback givers. They're maybe a little bit too sharp in their delivery, but that's their way.
mm,
So I have the discernment to say, okay, I know that this is how this person talks to themselves.
mm,
So I know that that's how they're going to talk to me, because I know that their internal self talk is very abrupt and it can be harsh. So I can't expect that they're not, I mean, why would I expect them to talk to me a different way? Right.
mm,
So I expect it. And if it's somebody that I still respect and value their opinion, I'll take it with a grain of salt, as they say. If it's somebody who just is being crass or negative just to be negative, I did get this feedback actually during this process that felt very, I could tell that he didn't really want to give me the feedback because he maybe felt like it was too honest. And then his feelings were that he just didn't really, this isn't his type of book, right? Like, first of
mm,
all, this, You Are Radically Loved, a journey to self-love, a healing journey to self-love. It's for a very specific reader. You know if this book is for you. If you're looking for something along the lines of what that sounds like, how to live a radically loved life, how to garner more self-love, this book is for you.
mm,
If that's not the types of reads you like to do, then this is probably not for you. And that's okay. But knowing that this is not the type of book he was looking for, because he's a little bit cynical about this type of content, I knew what kind of feedback he would give. But what was interesting is this is also a teacher in this space. He'll know I'm talking about him, and that's okay. Um, but you shouldn't have given me I told you I was going to give the feedback. I needed it. So now I get to share it with the thousands of people that are here. Um, so he is also in this space. He's also in the beginning stages of writing a book. And to me, I wanted his opinion because of his highly subjective
mm,
eye. And I found, and he knows this, we discussed this. What I found interesting is, as harsh as his feedback was, I still took it in because I still really value it. However, I noticed that the minute he gave the feedback, it was like, went right back to him talking about his own process and everything that he was doing. And he just finished his proposal and he's sending it out and he's really frustrated. And there was a lot of frustration. So I almost felt like, oh, okay, I know that while you were reading this, instead of coming at it from a sort of neutral place, you were engaging with my content from a place of comparison. And that perhaps maybe gave you a little bit more of a critical edge to the feedback that you were giving me. And that's okay. And I have no problem with it. I'm a big fan of honesty, people just telling me how they feel. I have no problem. I'm not for everybody. I'm not everybody's cup of tea. I'm not going to make everybody happy. I'm not an avocado, like, I understand that. But to me, it's always important to observe and take criticism, comments, feedback from a place of, it's what Stephen Kotler said to me, right? Who is one of my like mentors, somebody that I really aspire to be writing wise. I mean, he's incredible. He's incredibly talented, and I love him. He said, weigh your praise as much as you weigh your criticism. So, however important it is, if you don't weigh the praise, you won't weigh the criticism. And to me, it's like, okay, to me, that's the sign to stay neutral. Engage with the commentary from a neutral space.
Mhm.
And that makes sense to me because at the end of the day, what matters is how you feel about what is being put out there, about how you're engaging with your partner, about how you're taking feedback from the other for your own way of being or your own flaws or your own things that you need to improve. You know, it's like, how are you weighing both out so that you feel really grounded in receiving and you feel grounded in giving? You know, does that make sense?
Oh yeah, 100%. And I think it's an, you know, you said something really key, receiving the feedback from a neutral space. And whew, I've had some, you know, that takes a while to be able to do,
Of
first of all.
course.
Like this is something that I practice still all the time with my partner. And when I'm feeling myself getting charged, when a heated conversation is starting to, you can start to feel it. You recognize that kind of boiling tipping point almost. And here's the key, being able to step away and take a moment to step back to create that neutral space. Sometimes it takes a while. It doesn't always happen like within minutes. Sometimes we have to go to separate places in the house or walk outside and spend some time apart. But with whatever it is that's triggering you or whatever kind of feedback you may or may not like, to receive it from that neutral space, you really do have to go through the process of grounding yourself and
Mm,
really getting clear. And you know, maybe you're just not in the headspace for it that day. Like,
yeah.
don't engage with it that day. Leave it for the next day. Sleep on it.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. I want to leave it there because it's a great place to end. Tessa, thank you so much for doing this with us and obviously for being a vital role in our radically loved community, the House of Radical Love. Thank you so much. Where can people go for more information?
My website is my name, Tessa Tovar. Tovar is Tov as in Victor, AR.com. I am on Instagram as Tessa Marie, Marie, Tovar. And I have a YouTube channel. It's called Outside the Studio, which is also the name of my podcast. So you can watch, I have some amazing podcasts on there. And I also have some fun flows, some asana, some meditation, some really good yoga stuff. So
Yeah, good
check it
juicy
out.
things. We'll put those links
Yeah.
in the description below. Be sure to follow and check out. And Tessa, thank you so much for, again, just doing this and for being a part of this entire summit, for making this summit happen. I'm so grateful for you. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for being the introduction to the final part of the book, Spirit. I can't wait to continue this conversation. Stay tuned for our conversation tomorrow, which I'm looking at my notes. Let's see what's tomorrow. Oh, chapter 10, You Are Radically Wise. Stay tuned. Thank you so much for being here.